Comics, as I said, combine a series of images in a chronological order with words in order to tell a story. How do they do that? I'll talk mostly about issues that are unique or especially important to comics, and not issues that concern analysis of images in general. For some of you, my description may seem obvious if you know the language of comics very well. For some, it may contain brand new material. I think that even if you are already familiar with comic books and graphic novels, my closer attention will help you notice things you did not before. I'll use the first chapter of the first book of Bone, a very popular an acclaimed series by Jeff Smith that both children and adults have read with pleasure. The first issue I'll address is panels. Comic pages are made up of different panels, usually rectangles, each representing a different moment in time. The reader can imagine action or movement happening in between the panels or frames. The change happens between the frames. The frames are static, not moving, and we imagine the movement between what we see in the frames. So for example, on page 7, Bone and his friends are chased by a locust swarm. See how from panel to panel, Bone tries to run away, but the swarm gets on him and actually swallows his friends. Bone tries to run away, but the swarm constantly gains on him and actually swallows his friends whole. On page 8, we see him falling down a cliff. Each panel shows a different moment in his fall. The reader imagines him falling down between the panels. The space between the panels is called a gutter. Not all comics have them though. Panels can be different shapes and sizes. For instance, on page 7, the characters are running away on a plane, so the panels are markedly horizontal. They emphasize the movement across. On the next page, the movement is falling down, so the panels are markedly vertical, suggesting the falling from top to bottom. A panel can fill a whole page and even two. On the first page, we have a panel that covers the whole page because it establishes their location in the desert. Two other panels cover that one big panel partially. There are many other possible arrangements and shapes. We can't cover all. You can see a good example of a panel signifying time on page 18. Bone is in the dark and thinks his friend Smiley Bone is there too. He helps him light a cigar, and for a moment the light enables him to see that that's not Smiley Bone, but a dragon. That's how dragons look in that world. It takes him another moment to realize what he saw. This moment is signified, is marked for us by a totally dark panel where nobody speaks and nothing is seen and seemingly nothing happens. But we can guess that this dark panel is showing us that time passes before he realizes what he sees and screams. The dark panel that seems to show nothing actually shows us that a moment has passed. Page 18 shows us something else as well. How comics signify movement within the frame. Look at the central panel. We see the match moving and lighting up. we see the whole movement. Similarly, in several panels on page 1, you see sweat running down the characters' foreheads. We can't see actual movement, but we can imagine it through the lines signifying movement. Other comics and other moments use lines around the object to suggest movement and speed. On page 18, you'll also notice a sound effect word, scratch. One of the ways words appear is in this manner as sound effects. You'll see something similar on page 6. Before seeing the locust, we can see the letter Z repeated many times. This is the sound that the locusts make. The character can hear it, but of course they can't see those Z's. At first, the Z's are fairly small because the locusts are far away. But when they are near, the Z's become larger because the noise is bigger, the noise is louder. The way the sound effect is presented on the page suggests how loud it is. The main way language is presented in comics, though, is through speech bubbles. Speech bubbles are usually circles with a little spike directed at one of the characters. This is what the character is saying. Often, the letters are in the same size throughout, with some of them in bold for emphasis. But sometimes artists use the size and shape of the letters to convey meaning. In pages 1 and 2, Phony Bone speech bubble, it contains words that are often larger and shakier than the others who other characters' words. This suggests that he is yelling and screaming. In some comics, the letters have different colors or backgrounds to indicate how different characters speak. Even written language can have a strong visual aspect in comics. So the fact that this is words doesn't mean that they don't also convey meaning by how they look. The shape of the speech bubble also conveys meaning. Most famously, a speech bubble that looks like a cloud is a thought bubble, and the other characters can't hear it. On page 1 again, Phony Bone's is in a spiky speech bubble to indicate that he is screaming. The source of the speech bubble, by the way, is outside the frame of the panel. We automatically understand that the person who is speaking is outside of the panel, and we can't see him right there and then. I do want to mention that sometimes there's a box of text that seems outside or above the panels. This will usually be read as external narration, either by a character looking back or by a nameless narrator figure. Here's an example from the first Spider-Man comics. Before finishing, I want to point out that comics often use exaggerated facial expressions and body postures to make the characters' emotions clear. Comics can show real movement and don't have a lot of room for description of feeling or reactions. So a lot of emotion and information about emotion has to be conveyed by telegraphed visual means, by shorthand visual means. So instead of describing sadness, characters are shown shedding many tears. Smiley's smile is as wide as it can be, wider than is humanly possible. He stands tall like nothing could ever weigh on him. He's a happy and content guy, even in the middle of the desert. We don't need a narrator to tell us that he's happy and content. We see it on his face. We see it on his posture. Phony, on the other hand, is exhausted, and that exhaustion is also over the top. his face is sloping down and is collapsed, like the weight of the world is on his shoulders. His mental and physical state is easy to decipher, even if we have not read a word of the text yet. I hope that these three areas, panels, visual aspects of language, and characters, faces, and bodies, will help you be more attentive readers of the visual aspects of comics.